Person of Interest is a TV show that ran from September 22nd, 2011 to June 21st, 2016. In its pure structure, it falls into the procedural genre, stuff like NCIS and Numbers. On the other hand, when we move into the content side of the equation, we get something a lot more sci-fi, while still being grounded in modern times. If you're looking for a point of reference, think shows like Dollhouse, Terminator, The Sarah Connor Chronicles, or Ascension. This combination of procedural and sci-fi has been done before in shows like The Pretender and the currently airing APB. So what makes Person of Interest stand apart from the crowd? There's a lot I could honestly talk about with this show, but the thing I want to tackle today is how Person of Interest is one of the best depictions of fourth generation warfare, or 4GW, because it shows what it's like on both sides of this type of warfare. To overgeneralize at the start, 4GW is a concept that war is now usually happening between non-state actors and state actors in an asymmetrical battle through network organizations towards political goals. Things like the fight against ISIS, the war on the cartels, and other similar organizations. Now, to delve into the specifics of 4GW and how Person of Interest shows it. Let's start by classifying where our heroes fall on the divide of asymmetry in 4GW. The thing is, they fall on both sides, depending on which conflict you're talking about. In Season 3, and the fight between Team Machine, our titular heroes, and Vigilance, Team Machine represents the state actors, and Vigilance represents the non-state actors. Where when we hit Season 4 and 5, with the fight between Team Machine and Samaritan, Team Machine are the non-state actors, and Samaritan is the state actor. The fact that this show managed to depict both sides of a 4GW conflict with the same group of characters is one of the big reasons this is such a strong depiction of 4GW. Now, it's not a perfect representation of 4GW, and that's a common problem with representation through media. Fictional media, such as Person of Interest, will sacrifice realism for a more powerful story. The sacrifice that Person of Interest makes is the traditional public politicizing of the war. The other big idea within 4GW is that the war is innately political, and that's something that Person of Interest strays away from in one sense. The show goes for this secret wars plot that would allow the viewer to think something like this could be happening under our noses. It's a narrative device that has been used for a long time, from things like the previously mentioned Terminator, The Sarah Connor Chronicles, to things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Teen Wolf. Just because the wars that Person of Interest is depicting aren't inherently political like classic 4GW, it is still heavily based in ideology. Within both of these conflicts, the sides have core beliefs that they are fighting for. Vigilance is all about personal privacy wrapped in a veneer of the American Revolution. They act as probably the closest to a classically Maoist 4GW actor that the show depicts. On the other side of the conflict is Team Machine, who, even though we follow the human element of it, the main thrust of the ideology of Team Machine is the Machine, a sentient AI that was created to track terrorism. The Machine core mechanism is inherently pointed towards preservation, both of self and of the population as a whole. The thing about the Machine is that most of the information it uses to do so also invades privacy. Then we have the fight between the Machine and Samaritan, which is ground heavily in the fight over the worth of a human life. We can easily see this in the opening for the 5th season of Person of Interest.
You are being watched. The government has a secret system.
A system you asked for to keep you safe.
A machine that spies on you every hour of every day.
You granted it the power to see everything, to index, order, and control the lives of ordinary people.
The government considers these people irrelevant. We don't.
But to it, you are all irrelevant. Victim or perpetrator, if you stand in its way.
We'll find you.
While within there is the main crux of the fight, there is also just the will to survive on the part of Team Machine and the Machine in general. The first act of the fight between the Machine and Samaritan is an act of survival on the Machine's part to protect its actors by creating cover identities for them. Then we look at the characterization of asymmetry in 4GW. That's where Person of Interest really shows up. The most interesting of the asymmetries is in technology, and to look at this we have to examine the arc of one of the characters, Root. Root is referred to as the analog interface. She is the physical manifestation of the machine's will through the medium of a person who believes that the machine is a god. If we track her power level, it is generally directly aligned with how powerful the machine is. Throughout the battle with Vigilance, Root is the most powerful member of Team Machine, having full confidence of her actions as she follows the orders of the machine as she gets them. Contrast that with the lost Root of the war against Samaritan, still having full confidence in the machine, but the machine can't talk to her as much. She loses both her sense of purpose and most of her power, even though she is still the main conduit of the machine's will. She goes from constantly having the machine in her head to talking with it through the static of a television. This loss of connection is corollary to the degradation of the overall power that the machine has. Though, looking past just the machine-root relationship for the technology aspect of the disparity between the actors in 4GW, we need to take a minute to talk about the communication disparity in the fight between Vigilance and Team Machine. With Vigilance, you have communication centers, empty shipping containers filled with coded messages that can only be seen under blacklight. Compare this to the constant Bluetooth connection of Team Machine, and you have a very visible asymmetry right there. At the very start of the fight between the machine and Samaritan, there is a similar communication disparity, but the second action that the machine does in the fight is to obtain access to a secure form of communication, so there is less of a communication disparity between Team Machine and the operatives of Samaritan than there are between Vigilance and Team Machine. The other big asymmetry is in personnel. In the fight against Vigilance, Team Machine actually aligns with groups like Control, who happen to also be the groups pushing for the creation of Samaritan. We follow just an aspect of the war against Vigilance, but the full force bearing down on Vigilance is much larger than just Team Machine. We see organizations like the CIA actively working against Vigilance as well. On the other end of things, in the war against Samaritan, you have a small crew of people versus a corrupt faction of the government led by an aggressive AI. As Root puts it,
sorry, you have to pick a side because this is war. And the thing we're up against, it has virtually unlimited resources. Governments working unwittingly at its behest. Operatives around the globe protecting it. You know how many we have? 5. 6 if you count the dog. You have a god in this fight, Harold. And she's fighting for her life.
The interesting thing about the war against Samaritan is that Team Machine, and by extension the viewers, don't realize that they are a spoke in a hub-and-spoke network throughout the majority of the two-season battle. A hub-and-spoke network is a type of group where a core group within it is directing smaller cells, but the cells don't know about the other cells. While we think the fight against Samaritan is just a small group of people that we are following that are the dissenting faction against Samaritan, it is only a single part of a larger war against Samaritan controlled by a sentient AI, the machine. The fact that we get to see 4GW from the viewpoint of the foot soldier, I think is something very important, especially since we don't really get the full picture of the war against Samaritan ever. Through all these aspects, while it's not perfect, Person of Interest is one of the best representations of 4GW out there, and there is a value even in the flawed representation that it is showing. We shouldn't discount the power that media has here, allowing us to empathize with these characters and feel what they are going through, and to some extent, putting us into these situations to understand just how hard these wars are. The loss, the isolation that comes with living as an actor in war, whether it be 4GW or otherwise. And that is one of the reasons that Person of Interest in their depiction of these pieces of existence is important and has impact.